There's a subtle but powerful difference between being open and being transparent to the point of self-sabotage. When people say honesty is the foundation of a strong relationship, they're not wrong, but what they often misunderstand is timing. Honesty doesn't mean unloading your entire emotional database within the first few conversations. It doesn't mean sharing your fears, your past, your bank account, your family secrets, and your 5-year plan with someone you barely know. That's not honesty. That's emotional dumping. And emotional dumping doesn't build intimacy, it builds imbalance. The truth is, one of the most attractive things in the world is mystery, but not the manipulative kind where you play hard to get, act unavailable, or pretend you're something you're not. No, the kind of mystery I'm talking about is about presence, self-worth, and self-control. It's the ability to not need to be known immediately in order to feel validated. It's the ability to hold something back. Not because you're afraid, but because you value what you've built and understand not everyone deserves immediate access to it. When you meet someone and you instantly feel that spark, that connection, that chemistry, it's tempting to let your guard down too quickly. You want to share, to bond, to open up. That's human, that's real. But what separates people who inspire long-term interest from those who get taken for granted is their ability to be deliberate with how much of themselves they give away and when. If someone feels like they've already read the last chapter of your story in the first few pages, the journey loses depth, it loses tension, it loses emotional gravity. Mystery isn't about withholding, it's about unfolding. There's a rhythm to truly knowing someone. And when you allow people to discover you in layers, you create intrigue. You show that your life has dimensions, that your identity isn't packaged for consumption, and that your presence isn't a gift freely handed to anyone who shows interest. You teach others how to value you by the way you value yourself. Imagine two people meeting for the first time. One of them is kind, grounded, open, but measured. They speak with confidence but don't rush to tell you their life story. They're warm but hold a certain stillness. You get the sense that there's more there, but it's not being shoved in your face. You want to earn the right to know more. You want to be invited into their world. That's what mystery does. It draws people in, not by pretending to be someone you're not, but by choosing when and how to reveal the fullness of who you are. The other person, on the other hand, talks too much, too fast, too soon. They spill their secrets, they overshare their trauma, they vent about their ex, their parents, their finances, their fears. They reveal their insecurities in the hopes it will make them relatable, but instead it creates discomfort. The balance is thrown off. Instead of wondering how to connect with them, the other person starts wondering how to protect themselves. That's what oversharing does. It pushes people away under the illusion of bonding. The challenge is, we're often taught that emotional intimacy comes from vulnerability. And again, that's true, but only in the right context. Vulnerability is powerful when it's earned, when it's mutual, when it's safe. But vulnerability without boundaries isn't bravery, it's exposure. And when you expose too much of yourself without discernment, you leave your energy unguarded. You lose your emotional leverage. You blur the lines between closeness and dependence. Mystery, on the other hand, doesn't mean being cold. It doesn't mean being distant. It means being intentional. It means knowing what parts of your life are sacred and not offering them to someone who hasn't shown the maturity to hold them. It means you don't reveal your entire heart to someone whose hands are still untested. You don't give the best of you to someone who hasn't proven they'll respect it. Not because you're scared, but because you've learned, because you've grown, because you understand that not everyone should get a front row seat to your soul. When you practice this kind of self-respect, something shifts. You stop seeking connection through confession and start seeking it through alignment. You stop measuring closeness by how many stories you've exchanged and start measuring it by how someone shows up. You become someone who draws people in, not with words but with presence, not with information but with intention. You stop being predictable and start being compelling. There's another reason this matters, because early in dating, people aren't listening to understand you. They're scanning to see how they fit in your life. If you hand them the answers to your emotional puzzle too soon, they'll try to mold themselves to match what you're looking for. That's not connection, that's performance. But when you hold back just a little, you get to see, you get to observe who someone is when they're not trying to impress you. You get to witness their values in action, and you get to decide whether they're deserving of deeper access. This is how you protect your emotional real estate. You guard it not with walls, but with standards. You show that you're not just looking for someone to accept you, you're looking for someone who is aligned with you. And alignment takes time, it takes clarity, it takes intentional communication, not just vulnerability on demand. Mystery keeps that space alive, it keeps curiosity burning, it keeps respect intact. When you're not in a rush to be known, you send a message that your life is full, whether someone enters it or not, that you're not desperate to be seen, you're selective, you're not hiding your truth, you're waiting for the right moment to share it. And that kind of presence is rare, it's unforgettable. It doesn't just make someone interested, it makes someone invested. Because the truth is, when someone has to earn the layers of you, they appreciate them more, they lean in more, they remember more, they stay longer. Because they know they're not just passing time with you, they're experiencing something they don't get everywhere else. And that's not something you achieve by giving too much, it's something you cultivate by knowing the value of who you are and treating that value with care. There's a difference between being open about your past and being defined by it. Everyone's been hurt, everyone has a history, but the way you talk about your past heartbreaks tells people how much power that pain still has over you. When you meet someone new and you begin to build a connection, it's easy to believe that spilling everything about your past, the betrayal, the lies, the nights you cried yourself to sleep, will somehow build closeness, that if they understand what you've been through, they'll appreciate you more or love you more carefully. But what really happens is that you start inviting someone to view you through the lens of your wounds, instead of through the strength you've gained from them. You don't owe anyone your past, not right away, not before they've proven they know what to do with it, because the truth is, most people haven't earned the right to hear your story yet. Not because they're bad people, but because they simply haven't shown the consistency, the emotional maturity, or the depth to hold it with the care it deserves. When you share deep, painful stories too soon, it doesn't always bring people closer. Sometimes it confuses them, sometimes it overwhelms them, sometimes it even causes them to judge you unfairly, not because you're unworthy, but because they weren't ready to see that part of you. There's also a trap hidden inside of oversharing past heartbreak. You may not realize it, but when you tell someone all the ways you were hurt, mistreated, or overlooked, you give them a silent script. You're telling them what not to do to avoid being the bad guy. That sounds good in theory, but in practice, it often creates the illusion of safety. People will sometimes mimic what you say you needed, just long enough to gain your trust, and then reveal who they truly are. That's why sharing the lessons is more powerful than sharing the details, because when you talk about what you learned, you're not giving a manual to manipulate, you're showing your growth, you're showing the strength that came from the pain, not the pain itself. Imagine telling someone about how your ex never prioritized you, how they ghosted you, how they flirted with other people in front of you, how they made you feel like an afterthought. That might feel like you're being transparent, but what it really does is set a bar too low. You're basically saying, just don't be like them and you'll be fine. And that's dangerous, because now the standard is survival, not alignment. Now someone only has to be better than your worst experience to feel like they're doing enough, and you deserve more than that. You don't want someone who's just not toxic. You want someone who nurtures the connection, someone who challenges you to grow, someone who's fully present and emotionally intelligent. There's also something else at play here. When you share too much about your heartbreaks, you subconsciously relive them. You revisit the emotions, the betrayal, the loss. And sometimes, by telling the story over and over again, you keep yourself anchored in that identity, the one who was hurt, betrayed, or abandoned. But you are not that person anymore. You are not your past relationship. You are not your trauma. You are who you chose to become after all of that. And that's what you should be leading with. You don't need to announce how broken you were to prove how strong you are now. Your boundaries will say it louder than any story. The way you carry yourself, the way you demand consistency, the way you protect your peace, that's what people remember. You don't need to tell someone how much you've suffered for them to see how much you've grown. Real strength doesn't need to declare itself. It's felt in the way you hold space, in the way you walk away when something isn't right, in the way you choose peace over drama. Sometimes, sharing your heartbreaks can even backfire in ways you don't expect. If someone doesn't have the emotional depth to understand it, they might think you're still not over your ex. Or they might feel like they have to compete with your pain, like they have to heal you to be enough for you. That's not fair to them, and it's not fair to you. Because you don't want to start a relationship where someone feels like a therapist, or a fixer, or a replacement. You want to start from a place of wholeness, not perfection but wholeness. A place where you've already done the work, where your story has already been processed, and doesn't need someone else's approval to make sense. It's not about being cold or closed off. It's about timing. It's about discernment. Vulnerability is beautiful, but it's not something you offer like a transaction. It's something that happens gradually, through trust, through shared experiences, through mutual care. You don't walk into a room and throw your heart on the table, hoping someone won't step on it. You carry it with pride. You show it, not by bleeding on others, but by loving yourself enough to choose when and where that part of you gets to be seen. When you finally do open up, when someone has shown consistency, integrity, kindness, it will mean more. Because they'll know you didn't just tell them your story because you needed to talk. You told them because they earned it, because they listened without asking, because they showed up without conditions. And in that moment, your vulnerability becomes a gift, not a test, a bridge, not a burden, something sacred, not something strategic. And here's the truth that will always guide you. If someone is for you, they'll never need you to prove your pain to win their empathy. They'll see who you are now and respect the path you've walked, even if they don't know every detail. Because the right person doesn't just want to understand your past, they want to build a present and future with you that's rooted in peace, presence, and growth. They want to know your heart, not your history. They want to feel your energy, not your exhaustion. So instead of leading with what hurt you, lead with what healed you. Lead with the woman you became after everything tried to break you. Lead with your standards, your calm, your fire.
Let the scars speak silently, let your energy do the talking, and save your deepest chapters for the ones who don't need to hear your pain to believe in your worth. There's a quiet dignity in keeping your personal life personal, especially when it comes to your family. When you're building a connection with someone new, it's natural to want to give them context. You want to explain why you are the way you are, why you value certain things, or why certain behaviors trigger you. Often people use their family background to help paint that picture. And while that intention may come from a genuine place, the result isn't always what you think. Because the moment you start unraveling the tangled threads of your family dynamic, you open a door that may be too wide for someone who hasn't earned the right to walk through it. Family can be complicated. Maybe you've had to parent your own parents. Maybe you grew up with instability. Maybe the love in your family came with conditions, or maybe it didn't come at all. Whatever your story is, it's valid, it shaped you. But just because something shaped you doesn't mean it defines you. And if you're not careful, oversharing your family issues too soon can cause someone to see you not for who you are now, but for what you've come from. And that's not fair to the person you've become. Because you've done the work. You've grown beyond the environment that created you. You've risen above the dysfunction, the conflict, the chaos, and you deserve to be known for your strength, not your struggle.
When someone hasn't yet built trust with you, they won't always know how to hold your story. They might make assumptions. They might project. They might start to wonder if your family problems will become their problems. That doesn't mean they're shallow or unkind. It just means they haven't had the time to understand the full picture. And it's not their job to understand everything right away. It's your job to protect the parts of your life that need protecting. Because not everyone has the emotional intelligence or maturity to know what to do with your vulnerability. And that's okay. But that also means you get to decide who hears the full story and when. There's also the reality that many people unconsciously judge others based on their families. You could be the most grounded, stable, emotionally intelligent person in the room, but if you start talking about how your parents were absent, or how your siblings don't speak to each other, or how family holidays are filled with tension and resentment, someone might start painting a picture of you based on those fragments. They might not see your emotional growth. They might not understand how far you've come. They might just see mess. And that's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of the way people process information. First impressions matter, and when you introduce chaos too soon, it becomes the lens through which someone views you, even if only subconsciously. There's also something to be said for building a relationship on who you are, not who your family is. Because you are not your parents, you are not your siblings, you are not the dysfunction you came from, you are your choices, you are your values, you are your healing. When you share too much too soon about your family, you invite someone to analyze your upbringing instead of experiencing your presence. You turn what could be a clean slate into a field of emotional landmines, and that makes it harder for a real connection to form, because instead of seeing the woman in front of them, they're now thinking about the people behind her. There's also another layer to this. When you talk about your family too early, you also risk betraying your own boundaries, because sometimes we've convinced ourselves that our past doesn't bother us anymore, that we're at peace with our upbringing, that talking about it casually proves we've moved on. But the truth is, many people are still carrying wounds they haven't fully healed, and when those stories get told in a setting that isn't safe, the emotions behind them leak out. You might think you're being neutral, but your energy says otherwise. You might not realize it, but you're reliving old patterns, reacting from old fears, and expecting someone else to fix or understand a chapter that they didn't even live through. That's too much to place on a new connection, and that weight isn't theirs to carry. Instead of talking about your family, focus on what you've created for yourself. Focus on the values you live by, the peace you've cultivated, the standards you've raised. Let someone meet you, not your history. Let them experience the clarity and strength that came from walking through the fire, not the fire itself. That doesn't mean you never share, but when you do, it comes from a place of power. You're not confessing, you're choosing. You're not unloading, you're trusting, and the difference is felt deeply. If someone is worthy of hearing your story, they will prove it over time, not with grand gestures, but with consistency, with how they show up when it's not convenient, with how they listen when you're not entertaining, with how they hold space without trying to fix, judge, or retreat. That's when you'll know you can open up, not because you need to explain yourself, but because you want to deepen the bond. And when that moment comes, it will feel safe, it will feel earned, and it will bring you closer, not make you feel exposed. There's wisdom in privacy, not secrecy, privacy. One is about shame, the other is about standards. One hides because it's afraid to be seen, the other waits because it knows not everyone deserves a front row seat. You're allowed to keep your past sacred. You're allowed to hold your family story close to your chest. You're allowed to be fully present without being fully revealed. That's not being distant, that's being deliberate. And that's how you build a connection that's based on truth, not trauma. When the right person gets to know you, they'll see the quiet strength behind your boundaries. They'll notice how calm you are in chaos, how thoughtful you are with your words, how intentional you are with your presence. They may not know what you've walked through to become this way, but they'll feel it, and that feeling will speak louder than any story ever could. They won't need to know the pain to recognize the power. They won't need the history to believe in the future. They'll choose you because of who you are now, not in spite of where you came from, but because of who you became after it. There's something delicate about the parts of you that you don't like to look at too closely. The insecurities, the self-doubt, the areas where you quietly criticize yourself when no one's around. And when you start dating or forming a new connection, those insecurities can start to bubble up. You may feel like if someone sees them, they'll understand you more, that by exposing your flaws up front, you're proving how real and vulnerable you are. You might even believe that sharing those things shows strength. But in reality, what it often shows, especially too early, is emotional leakage. It shows a person that you haven't yet claimed ownership of your inner world, and that becomes a burden to them, whether you mean for it to or not. People don't fall in love with insecurity. They fall in love with someone who has insecurities and knows how to hold them with grace. That's the key difference. It's not about pretending you're flawless. It's about not turning your inner conflicts into the main character of your relationship. Because here's what happens when you lead with insecurity. The relationship becomes uneven. One person becomes the stabilizer, the cheerleader, the emotional bodyguard, and the dynamic starts to shift from mutual attraction to emotional caretaking. That's not love, that's imbalance. You might think saying things like, "I hate my body," or "I don't think I'm good enough," or "I always mess things up" will make you relatable, that it will soften you and make someone want to reassure you. But reassurance is not the same as connection, and when someone is constantly placed in the role of validating you, they don't have space to see you. They only see the version of you that needs fixing. They stop responding to your energy and start responding to your anxiety, and that drains desire, connection, and curiosity faster than you realize. If every conversation is laced with self-deprecating remarks, with subtle pleas for affirmation, with undertones of "please tell me I'm enough," then what you're really doing is trying to outsource your self-worth, and no one can carry that for you, not long-term. Maybe they will try at first, maybe they'll compliment you more, text you more, do everything they can to make you feel seen, but eventually that emotional labor becomes too heavy, not because they don't care, but because they can't win that game. They can't pour enough into you to make up for what you haven't poured into yourself. It's also important to understand that when someone hears your insecurities too soon, they form a blueprint, an emotional map of how to navigate you. And not everyone uses that map kindly. Some people will learn exactly how to press your buttons, some will know where your weaknesses lie, and they'll use those insecurities not to support you but to manipulate you. When you tell someone what you fear about yourself, you give them access to a very sensitive part of your mind. That kind of access should be earned slowly, not handed out in the name of vulnerability. Think of your self-worth like a house. If you're constantly pointing out the cracks in the walls, the flaws in the design, and the things you haven't fixed yet, people won't see the beauty of the space, they'll just see what's broken. But if you invite someone in with calm confidence, let them sit down, feel comfortable, and discover the home for themselves, they'll begin to appreciate the charm, the warmth, the uniqueness. You don't need to explain what's wrong for someone to feel what's right. That's what composure looks like. And it doesn't mean you're perfect. It means you've developed a kind of quiet confidence that says, "I know who I am, and I'm okay with the parts I'm still working on." When that energy shows up in a connection, it's magnetic. It says to someone, "I don't need you to fix me. I need you to respect me." That sets a different tone, a healthier tone. One built on equality, not emotional dependency. Insecurities should be processed internally, with compassion, not dumped externally, in hopes that someone else will carry them. And when you do the internal work, when you challenge those limiting beliefs, when you reframe your self-talk, when you build evidence that contradicts your fears, you show up with a completely different presence. You don't need to say you're confident. People feel it. You don't need to beg for reassurance. People give it freely, because your energy welcomes it, not demands it. There's also a sacredness to being able to hold your private doubts and still show up with self-respect. That doesn't make you fake, it makes you emotionally mature, because maturity is knowing when to speak and when to sit with yourself. It's knowing that your job is to manage your emotions, not assign that role to someone else, especially someone who's still figuring out who you are. Sometimes people think withholding their insecurities is dishonest, that if you don't show someone every flaw, you're being inauthentic. But that's not the truth. The truth is, you're allowed to be multi-layered. You're allowed to bring your best self forward first, not because you're hiding, but because you're giving someone a chance to appreciate you without placing the weight of your healing in their hands. That's not deception, that's discernment. Later, if the connection deepens, and trust is built, and you feel seen for who you are beyond the surface, then yes, share what you struggle with, share the thoughts you fight in the quiet, but even then, don't hand it over like a burden. Share it like something you fought through, like something you're still navigating, but with strength. Let them witness your journey, not just your wounds. And when someone sees that you're self-aware, that you're willing to do the work on yourself, that your insecurities don't define you, they'll respect you. They'll feel inspired, not obligated. They'll admire your ability to face your fears without needing someone else to babysit them. That's when real connection starts to form. Not out of pity, but out of shared humanity. Not out of imbalance, but out of emotional alignment. Because here's the truth, everyone has insecurities, but the ones who are most attractive, most grounded, most respected, they're the ones who know how to carry their insecurities without placing them in someone else's lap. They've developed the self-awareness to know what they need to work on, and the emotional intelligence to know who to involve in that process and when. So instead of saying, I hate this about myself, ask yourself where that voice came from. Instead of telling someone, I don't feel good enough, ask yourself what standard you've been chasing that was never yours to begin with. Instead of needing someone to rescue you, ask yourself how you can rescue your own self-talk. That's where the power lies, not in being flawless, but in being someone who's working on their flaws with grace, not desperation, with ownership, not apology, with calm, not chaos. That's what makes someone unforgettable, not their perfection, but their peace. When you begin to feel a spark with someone, there's often a temptation to let them know exactly where you see it going. You start daydreaming about the potential, imagining the future, visualizing what it could look like if everything aligns. And in that excitement, you might feel the urge to express your long-term hopes. Maybe you tell them you want marriage in the next few years, or that you're hoping for kids, or that you see yourself building a life with someone who matches your energy, ambition, and values. On the surface, that might seem like honesty, and in some ways it is. But when shared too soon, it's not clarity, it's overexposure. It's handing someone your roadmap before you've seen whether they even know how to drive. Your long-term relationship goals are sacred. They represent the life you've envisioned, the standards you've cultivated, the inner work you've done to figure out what you truly want. And that vision isn't something you hand out in the first few conversations just to see if someone nods along. Because people can nod, people can agree, people can say all the right things when they know exactly what you want to hear. When you reveal your entire relationship playbook up front, you give someone the chance to perform instead of reveal. They'll mirror what you say. They'll adapt to your narrative. They might even appear like the perfect fit, not because they are, but because they've been told how to play the part. This creates a dynamic where the illusion of alignment can take the place of genuine connection. Instead of two people discovering each other, it becomes one person molding themselves to match what they think the other wants. And that can feel good at first. It can feel like chemistry, like things are falling into place. But it's not rooted in reality. It's rooted in performance. And eventually, when that performance can't be sustained, the cracks begin to show. The person stops matching your pace. The promises become inconsistent, and suddenly you're left wondering how someone who seemed so perfect for your plan is no longer showing up the way they did in the beginning. That's why it's important to observe before you announce, to witness someone's actions before you offer your script. When you don't immediately tell someone what you're looking for long-term, you give yourself a clear view of how they naturally operate. Are they emotionally available? Do they follow through on their words? Do they communicate openly? Do they show up with presence and consistency without being prompted? These are the signs of real alignment. And you only get to see them clearly when you aren't guiding someone to mimic them. There's also something empowering about not needing to declare your intentions immediately, not because you're playing games, but because you've developed the patience to let things unfold. You're not rushing to define the outcome, you're focused on understanding the connection. That kind of emotional discipline speaks volumes. It says, I know what I want, but I'm not desperate to label it. I'll know when it's right, not because someone repeats my vision back to me, but because they live it in the way they show up. When you protect your relationship vision early on, you also protect your emotional space. You're not just guarding against manipulation, you're guarding against false hope. When someone knows your endgame, they can temporarily fill the role, even if they don't have the capacity or desire to maintain it. But when you hold that vision close to your chest, you get to see who someone truly is. You get to see what pace they move at, how they handle conflict, how they prioritize your time, and what kind of emotional investment they're willing to make. That's the real data, not what someone says about the future, but how they behave in the present. Of course, this doesn't mean you hide your values. It's not about being vague or misleading. You should absolutely be clear about your standards, what you will and won't accept, what kind of emotional maturity you expect, what kind of energy you bring into relationships. That part should never be hidden, but your personal blueprint, the timeline you envision, the future milestones you dream about, the specific relationship goals you're holding, that doesn't need to be laid out like a checklist on the first few dates. That's something that can unfold as trust builds, as mutual interest deepens, as compatibility reveals itself in real time. There's also a psychological benefit to this approach. When you don't immediately reveal your long-term intentions, you stay grounded in the moment. You're not projecting into the future. You're not filtering everything through the lens of, will this person be my forever? Instead, you're asking, who are they today? How do they treat me now? What kind of energy do they bring into my life? That presence is powerful. It prevents you from romanticizing potential and keeps you connected to the truth of what's in front of you. It allows you to respond to what is, rather than react to what you hope will be. And here's something else to consider. When you keep your relationship goals private in the early stages, it creates a natural boundary. It signals that you are not handing over your emotional future to a stranger. You're not hoping someone fits your dream. You're deciding whether they even deserve to hear it. That's self-respect. That's emotional intelligence.
That's how you protect your peace while still being open to love. If the connection grows and the person shows up consistently and the energy deepens naturally, then yes, talk about the future, share your vision, reveal what you're building toward, but by then, it won't feel like a performance. It won't feel like you're hoping they agree. It will feel like a conversation between two people who have already proven themselves to one another, who have already shown alignment in action, who are not just talking about a future, they're building the foundation for it in real time, and when that moment comes, your relationship vision won't be something you use to convince someone to stay. It will be a shared blueprint, co-created through trust, respect, and mutual intention. That's how strong relationships are born, not through premature declarations, but through slow, intentional unfolding, through earned understanding, through the quiet power of emotional timing. When you know your worth, you don't rush to explain it. You let it speak for itself. You let your life show the direction you're heading, and you allow someone else to choose whether they're truly ready to walk beside you. What you choose to share, and when, isn't just about honesty, it's about power. The power to protect your peace, to guard your standards, and to build meaningful connection based on earned trust rather than emotional exposure. You don't need to hand someone a map to your heart before they've shown they can handle it with care. Your past, your pain, your plans, they're not interview questions for someone to pass. They're sacred, they're yours, and the right person won't need immediate access to all of it to value you. They'll feel the strength in your boundaries, the grace in your presence, and the depth in your silence. You are not hiding, you're honoring yourself. And when you lead with that kind of self-respect, the ones who are meant for you won't just listen, they'll lean in, stay close, and rise to meet the standard you've set.